Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Once again, sitting down every Thursday morning and doing our best to update the Big Ten power rankings heading into week 7. Kind of a crazy week 6. This has been a conference that I think you're seeing three teams at the top of this conference kind of separate themselves from the pack. That being said, there are so many teams in this Big Ten conference that even through 6 weeks of a college football season, we're still trying to figure out what they are heading into the rest of 2024. Fired up to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, and I think most importantly, let it fly in the comment section. I have certainly some hot takes within my Big Ten power rankings. I'm sure many don't agree. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, all the support has meant the absolute world to the boys. These have been a blast for me to do, even though I've been quite off base with a couple of these teams in the Big Ten. So appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Now, I don't feel totally comfortable with a ton of these rankings within the Big Ten. I will say I feel pretty dang comfortable with the top three in that first tier. Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. Now, you can stack these teams however you want. I think this is the way I would do it right now, but we're going to get our answer pretty dang quick about Ohio State and Oregon, right? They play Saturday night. I'm going to go Ohio State as the number one team in the Big Ten because just the body of work has been a little bit more consistent than what Oregon's has been. These are two of the most talented rosters in all of college football, quite frankly. Now, Ohio State's been consistent for pretty much all of 2024. The problem with Oregon is we've seen the flashes of what this team can be when it's firing on all cylinders. We just haven't seen them fire on all cylinders consistently in 2024. Now, I think the fascinating conversation is what does it look like if Oregon puts it all together Saturday night in Autzen Stadium? I think they certainly can beat Ohio State. I actually picked Oregon to beat Ohio State in that football game. That's going to be a fascinating game. We're not going to spend too much time at differentiating these two teams, two of the best teams in the country, and we're going to get our answer relatively quick in about 48 hours. Going to Penn State. I think Penn State is right in the thick of it as a legit contender in the Big Ten. Couple of things that I really like about Penn State. One, this offense, it's different from 2023. And you kind of look at what's held Penn State at the highest level of the Big Ten. It's largely been the offense. It's largely been Penn State just not being able to be explosive in the passing attack. You look at the numbers through the first 6 weeks of the season. I mean, Penn State is top 5 in the country, averaging 10.7 yards per pass attempt. You know, Coach Koldnicki has come in and completely revolutionized this Penn State offense. And I think that matters when they're going to play some of the best teams in the Big Ten Conference and, quite frankly, in the country. And I think, secondly, like they run the football a lot. They run the football 62% of the time. They run the football extremely effectively. But the thing I've gotten answered over the last 2 weeks against Illinois, against UCLA, is I do feel like this defense is kind of back to, probably what I expected it to be heading into 2024. I think there was a time where I was looking at this Penn State defense and say, are they a top 10 unit like they've been the last couple of years? I had my question marks about it. I feel pretty good that Penn State is one of the best defenses in the country. So you combined that elite defense that we're used to seeing with Penn State with an offense that's able to manufacture some explosive plays. This team's a legitimate threat, not only in the Big Ten, but I think this team can make some noise in the college football playoffs. And I think a lot of Big Ten fans look at this and say, yeah, that checks out. Like Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, they've been the three teams that have been the most dominant within the Big Ten. Now, moving to the dark horse category, let's start with it. I've taken a lot of heat because I haven't totally been a buyer of the Indiana hype. And every single week I watch their games back, and every single week they look like a damn good football team. This is the question mark with Indiana. Is you look at this Indiana team, you say, hey, who's the quarterback in the Big Ten that's leading this conference in passing yards? It's not Dylan Gabriel. It's not Will Howard. It's not Miller Moss. It's actually Curtis Rourke for Indiana. And he's been exceptional on the year. 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 74% completion percentage. And this Indiana team is a top 10 scoring offense in the country. And then you combine that with a defense that's top 15 in the country, only allowing 17.2 points per game. Like, there's a lot to like about what you've seen from Indiana over the last couple of weeks, or really just to start the 2024 season. Now, the big caveat, the big question mark we have with Indiana is, all right, who's the best team they've played on their schedule? And it's something they can't control, but it's something that when we're stacking these teams, like, you want to see a good play against good competition. And the best team Indiana has on their schedule so far, a win over, is Maryland. I don't think Maryland's a great team in the Big Ten. I don't think they're bad, but I think the big question mark is, does the dominant football play we've seen from Indiana translate when you start playing some of the teams at the upper end of the Big Ten? Now, we're going to get that answer in a week and a half when they play Nebraska. But at a certain point, you got to start giving Indiana their flowers. And I'm going to do that right here. Number 5, and this is probably my hottest take, but this might be the take that I believe in the most, though. This Washington Huskies team is legit. I think they are a very good team. You take a look at who's the number 2 quarterback in the Big Ten Conference in terms of passing yards. Yeah, that would be Will Rogers. 74% completion percentage, 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns to only 1 interception. You look at the running back, Jonah Coleman, top 3 in the Big Ten in rushing yards. You look at the wide receivers, they got 2 wide receivers who are in the top 5 in the Big Ten in receiving yards, and Denzel Boston and Giles Jackson. The biggest thing I love about Indiana is, we kind of believed in Jetfish. We believed in Will Rogers in the Jetfish offense. We thought this offense would be kind of good. Our biggest question mark was, what does Washington look like along the lines of scrimmage? And I kind of said, we'll find out when they play Michigan on Saturday night. I wouldn't say Washington dominated Michigan in the trenches. I think Michigan's very good in the trenches, but Washington certainly held their own. And I'm saying, if you can hold your own against Michigan along the lines of scrimmage, you probably can hold your own against a lot of these teams in the Big Ten. So I couple that with, Will Rogers playing really good football, Jet Fish being an excellent football coach, and you have a line of scrimmage play that I think is pretty dang good. This is a very dangerous team in the Big Ten, and they've lost 2 games, and I think that's why the national media is kind of sleeping on them. You look at their 2 losses, they outgained Washington State, probably should have won that game, certainly should have won that game against Rutgers on the road, where they outgained Rutgers by over 200 yards. They've had some problems in the red zone. They've had some problems with field goal kicking. Outside of that, this Washington team's been very, very good on both sides of the football. Illinois, another one of those kind of tough teams to figure out. A really impressive win a couple of weeks ago against Nebraska. My question with Illinois is, there's some things that you like. I think Luke Altmaier's playing pretty good football. I think he got 2 NFL caliber wide receivers on the boundary. I think he got a good offensive line. The defense has been by far the most improved unit on this football team. My question is, how good can they be? I don't know how high the Illinois ceiling is. And for an example, like Illinois, Nebraska, they both play up to their potential. Like, who wins that football game? I think you could argue Nebraska would. Nebraska has a higher ceiling. Nebraska has a little bit more talent on the football team. That's probably my take. But Illinois is a team that's been really dang steady in the Big Ten and doesn't really have any glaring holes within their roster. Looking at Nebraska, I think this is such a fascinating team. I think there's a very good chance Nebraska finishes the season 10-2. Like, you look at some of their matchups, and that Indiana game, that's going to be one of those games where we start to figure out, like, what does the, kind of second tier of the Big Ten look like? Because I think Nebraska can get hot. Like, if they can beat Indiana, they probably drop one to Ohio State. Then they play USC, and we're going to get to USC, but we got some question marks about USC after the last couple of weeks. Keep an eye on this Nebraska team. Dylan Raiola is playing like one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I think they have one of the best defensive lines that we see not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. It's going to be interesting. Michigan. I think the big conversation is Jack Tuttle the guy to unlock this Michigan offense? Now, my problem with Michigan is, even if Jack Tuttle is the best quarterback on this Michigan roster, I don't think that makes Michigan a top offense in the Big Ten. But I think even more concerningly, I'm not sure how good this Michigan defense is. Yeah, I think this Michigan defense is pretty dang good, but is it a top 5 unit like I expected heading into 2024? I would argue it's probably not right now, especially with some of the injuries and lack of depth that they have within that Michigan defense. They got the star players. Mason Graham's been really good. Josiah Stewart's been phenomenal. Obviously, Will Johnson at cornerback. I'm a Michigan fan. Uh, it seems like there are some growing pains within the Michigan defense with Wink Martindale taking over. And if this Michigan defense isn't a top 5, top 10 unit in the country, I don't think this Michigan team is as good as we expected them to be, even if Jack Tuttle becomes a guy that Michigan can lean on at the quarterback position. You look at USC. USC's been a roller coaster, man. And I think they have a chance to really, I wouldn't say save their season, but it does feel like a must win game against Penn State this weekend. Look, I think Miller Moss has been really good. And I know some USC fans have been on Miller Moss. The biggest problem is you can't have the liabilities they have on the offensive line in the Big Ten Conference. You might have been able to maneuver through that in the Pac 12. You can't in the Big Ten. And the offensive line is really starting to rear its ugly head. And then I think on the defensive side of the football, if Eric Gentry doesn't come back for USC and there's talks about Eric Gentry redshirting, that's a problem for USC. He's been by far the best player on defense, and that USC defense looked just night and day different when they didn't have Eric Gentry on the football field. And my biggest concern about USC is as this Big Ten season wears on, you had Bear Alexander transfer out. He's going to redshirt and transfer. Do they have the depth to be the team I expect them to be in the second half of the 2024 season in the Big Ten Conference? That's probably my biggest question mark about USC. There are aspects of this USC team that I absolutely love. Now, I think Jacoby Lane at the wide receiver position is arguably one of the best wide receivers in this conference. I think Woody Marks is one of the better running backs in this conference. I think they have clearly made improvements on the defensive side of the football. The biggest problem with USC is you have some glaring holes within this roster that are really hard to be a top contender in the Big Ten with those kind of holes. So I'm going to keep USC in that dark horse category because I do think they have the talent. You talk about ceilings. Like I think USC's ceiling might be higher than Indiana's ceiling, but Indiana's a little bit more of a complete team as we sit than USC. I don't feel great about it, but that's kind of where I'm at with USC right now. Outside looking in, and I'm probably going to catch some heat from some Minnesota fans for having Minnesota below USC, and I think that's quite fair. Um, Again, Minnesota got the run game going against USC, but it hasn't been really consistent on the year. If this Minnesota team's not running the football like we're used to, I think I just have question marks about how good they can really be. You look at Rutgers, really good defense, solid rushing attack. It was kind of a sloppy game against Nebraska, but that offense looked like it really struggled until the fourth quarter. The Iowa Hawkeyes, my concern with Iowa is the offense still ain't very good, and you can tell they've made some changes. Obviously, brought in a new offensive coordinator. But I don't think Cade McNamara is the answer. I don't really think they have any weapons that scare you in the pass catcher department, whether it's at tight end, whether it's at wide receiver, and then you have a really good running back in Caleb Johnson. My biggest concern is kind of similar to Michigan. Is the Iowa defense as good as we always assume it's going to be every single season? I don't think it is. And that's probably my biggest concern. Iowa's relied on this defense to be a 9-10 win team over the last couple of years. I don't know if this is a defense that you can rely on to go win you football games. And I don't think there's been enough improvement from the Iowa offense to really believe in this team. I really do think Washington is going to go into Kinnick Stadium and win that football game. Maryland, uh, solid team. Not really sure. I mean, you just had their offensive coordinator, Josh Gaddis, get up there and kind of boost and brag on Twitter about having like the 38th best offense in the country. It's a solid team. I don't think it's an elite team. Wisconsin, Michigan State. Michigan State's a fascinating one. Like I think the ceiling is relatively high for Michigan State, but the way Aiden Childs is playing and kind of the roller coaster that you're seeing Aiden Childs be, it's a hard team to have a ton of confidence in. But I'm going to leave them in that tier because I do think there are aspects of that team that you can still believe in. Then you look at UCLA, Purdue, and Northwestern. Those three teams, like there's just not really any part of those teams that you can look at and say, I believe in that aspect. And I think Purdue might be the worst team in the Big Ten, maybe behind Northwestern. But I think any way you cut it, that's probably the bottom tier, like teams that you look at play every single Saturday and say we just don't have a lot of confidence in what they can bring to the table. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.